Awesome. So, good morning. My name is Letitia Jensen, and I am a reporter with Willamette Week, and I'm here with Dr. Markisha Smith, the City of Portland's Equity Director. Thank you for joining me this morning. Could you just briefly tell me about yourself and your job, your role?
Sure. Thank you for having me and for giving me this opportunity. So I have been the director for the Office of Equity and Human Rights at City of Portland for a little over a year now. It was a year in February. And really, I was coming into this role having worked at the Oregon Department of Education as director of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Office there. And so this is work that I have been doing for some years. I've been a college professor, I've been a high school English teacher, and so I have this foundation in education. So I'll tell everyone I'll always be an educator, or always be a teacher. But in that, I didn't also realize that there was sort of this budding work around equity, and we've called it so many different things, right? And so all of that was really sort of developing for me, and I was finding myself in different spaces and having conversations about race, and at that time, related to what was happening with Black and brown kids in school. And so all of that just began to really morph into the work that I'm doing now with the city, and excited to be here. We provide a lot of internal support to bureaus around moving their equity goals, but I would say we can't do that without what happens externally with the community. And so we've really been, since my time in the position, trying to develop our strategic plan and think about how we are supporting internally and externally to move the work of racial equity and also disability within the city and our services to the community. So that's a little bit about my background.
Thank you. What do you think is the biggest misconception about what your office does?
I think, it's interesting because when you have an office situated like ours is, there is this tendency to just say, well, they'll do it. They can fix it, right? And so it's very easy to deflect to our office. So if there's anything that comes up around race or disability, anything that has to do with those kinds of issues, that, send it to Office of Equity and they'll handle it. And I think, one, we do have some responsibility to address issues that come to us. And we can't do that without the support and collaboration across the city, across bureaus, with our mayor, with our city council. Like, we can't do that as one single office. And I shared that in a press conference a couple weeks ago as we were talking about recent events with George Floyd and like all that's happening that we're seeing play out in our media today. And I said, yes, we are an office that is set on making sure that we address systemic oppression, and we think about how do we dismantle systems and replace them with ones that are equitable. And at the same time, we can't do that without partnership and without support from others who are also in the city that are providing resources to the community. And so I think that often happens when you have an office like ours. That's probably the biggest misconceptions. We got it, right? We can do it. We can fix everything we have the cure for racism. And I'm like, well, if that were the case, right, we wouldn't have an office. So it doesn't work that way. And we have to work in collaboration with each other.
Mm-hmm. What is something in Portland that you've seen that gives you the most hope for lasting change in the past few weeks?
I would say, and I'll give a couple. I think one of the things that has been, we've had protests, and Portland is famous for, getting behind sort of these political issues and protesting in a variety of different ways. I've seen that over the 10 years that I've lived here. I would say that what feels different about this moment in time is folks actually had to watch and could see a man losing his life just like live, right? Like that was happening. We're sitting in our living rooms and kind of watching this play out. And so I think there now is this, we can't ignore it, right? Like we could say, so many things are hearsay, or, was that really police brutality, or what were the other elements? Like we can kind of explain that away. And I think this is the first time we can't explain this away, right? This is what happened. And so because of that, I think the energy has shifted. And so what for me, I think gives me hope is seeing a shift in the way that folks are tackling issues, like where it's no longer, let's think about, racial equity like as an afterthought, like that has to be the piece that we're centering. And I'm hearing white folks say, like, we've also got to think about how we're centering Black folks, like that needs to be the conversation that we're having. How have Black folks been oppressed in our system? And I'm hearing folks that I haven't heard before say that. Now, one could say, we're kind of like where people are getting on the bandwagon, because if you're not talking about this, somebody's going to be like, shame on you. But I would like to say that I'm given hope in that the conversation seems to have shifted, particularly in the city, as we're thinking about CARES Act funding and all these things that have to do with COVID, that we really are centering the Black community in a way that I have not heard before. So I think that's one really, hopeful thing. The other I would say is that I think we're at a point where conversations have always happened about what policing looks like, particularly in communities of color. And for me anyway, I'm seeing a shift in how the community is really having a significant influence on the way in which we're going to be approaching policing moving forward, and thinking just particularly about our Portland Police Bureau. And I am hopeful, given kind of the mayor's action plan around what happens with funding for police, that we get there, right?
What's something that most people don't know about inequality in Portland that you wish that more people did?
That's a good question. I think we've been having a lot of conversations on my team lately about this whole idea around intersectionality. And so Kimberly Crenshaw is sort of she's the academic that coined this term of intersectionality. And I think that when we're having conversations about equity and race and all these pieces, is that when you think about how a person's identity, as we'll just say, for instance, a Black woman who also happens to be a Black woman with a disability, who also happens to be a Black woman with so X, Y, and Z, so there's all these other components that, if you compare that individual to, say, a white woman with a disability, the Black woman with the disability is always going to have significant challenges trying to navigate our systems. And so I think a lot of people don't, it's like, why aren't we talking about people that are poor? Why aren't we talking about, and the truth is that all the ways in which folks identify, and in particular Black folks identify, just compound those things, right? And we're not thinking about, so it's not just about disability. We've got to be looking at race and disability and where are the disparities there. And I think that's a concept that folks have not, we hear about it, but we haven't really begun to unpack that in the ways that we need to. And so for folks that do this professionally, like me, we've been having the conversations, right? We've been saying, what are the ways in which all these identities intersect that really compound the barriers that folks face. But that's not common knowledge. And I think it will look like, this pushback around, why are we only talking about race? Well, we have to center race because that's where it starts, right? And even in this concept of intersectionality, that's where we start. And then we think about all the other pieces that layer on top of that create tremendous barriers for individuals who are really, truthfully, trying to operate in a system that wasn't designed for them, right? People the system isn't broken. It works, but it works for the folks that it was designed to work for. And so here we have folks that, were brought here involuntarily and now figure it out, right? And it doesn't work that way. And then when you have all these other pieces, think about what's happening with our LGBTQ community, right? And Black, death that's happening with Black trans folks, there's just a lot, right? And so I don't think people are having that conversation about intersectionality as much as we probably need.